Welcome to the Branding Room Only podcast, where we share career stories, strategies, and lessons learned on how industry leaders and influencers have built their personal brands. Now, let's get started with the show. Hi, everybody. It's Paula Edgar, your host of Branding Room Only, and I'm so excited to speak to another Paula today. I'd like to introduce you to my guest, Paula Davis. She is the founder and CEO of the Stress and Resilience Institute. And Paula is an internationally recognized expert on burnout prevention and resilience, and she works with leaders and organizations to build stronger, more adaptable teams. She is the author of the best-selling book, Beating Burnout at Work, and the upcoming book, Lead Well, 5 Mindsets to Engage, Retain, and Inspire Your Team, set to release in February of 2025. Paula's expertise has been featured in the New York Times, the Oprah Magazine, the Washington Post, and many other publications. Drawing from her expertise as a lawyer and her advanced training in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, Paula combines cutting-edge research with practical strategies to address today's most pressing workplace challenges. Paula, welcome to the Branding Room.
Thank you so much, Paula. I love this. 2 Paulas.
Exactly. Paula times 2. So tell me this. What is a personal brand? What does it mean to you? How would you define it?
So I love this question, and I actually gave this a little bit of thought. And for me, I was jotting down some notes. And for me, it's really how you want to be seen and remembered by others. It's sort of like, to me, kind of like the stake you're putting in the metaphorical ground out in the world, and how you want others to see you and remember you.
I love that. I love that. So that being said, how would you describe yourself in 3 words or short phrases?
Okay, so this was also another really interesting and amazing question. And so I was once asked to describe myself in 6 words or less. And I chose small town girl with big dreams because I feel like it captures like where I came from. I come from a really, really small town in southeastern Wisconsin, like population less than 2,000. And that I've always felt like I wanted to just be out in the world, like doing something. So there's that phrase. And then the other 3 words that come to mind for me are really what my values are, kindness, courage, and love, and how I like to try and see the world through that lens, make important decisions through that lens. A lot of what I do in my business is sort of through that lens. And so that was the other piece of the puzzle.
I love that. Kindness, courage, and love. I love that. So do you have a favorite quote or mantra?
I love quotes. I have like entire books of quotes. People will send me quotes. I flipped, to different ones depending on, what I need to draw from the universe or what have you. But there's one that I really, I think, keep coming back to a lot. And it is, between what is said and not meant, and what is meant but not said, a lot of love is lost.
Oh, wow, that just took my breath away. That is, wow. That is a great quote. And so true. I don't, everybody just thought about the relationship that they're in or want to be in.
Well, and I think it speaks to, I'm really interested in Dan Pink's work across the board, but his latest book is about regrets. And I think it just helps me keep front of mind. Like if there's a relationship I want to foster, if there's something that I want to say to somebody, I guess even business or personal, and the quote's probably oriented a little bit more on the personal side. It's just that, say it, right? If somebody inspired you, say it. If somebody is, on your last nerve, try to figure out, a nice way to kind of like bring that up. But like, I think it just really speaks to a lot of how to minimize those relationship regrets.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Tell me this, do you have a hype song? And this is like when they're going to get full Paula Davis, what song is playing in your head? Or if you're having a terrible day, what song are you putting on to hype you up? And it could be the same song or 2 different songs.
So I am obsessed with music. It is one of my great loves and great passions. And I love listening to all kinds of music. And it was hard for me to really pick one. And the genre that I really kind of kept coming back to was like 80s music, being a girl who grew up in the 80s. So gosh, there's just so much. I was thinking of like Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi is a really good one. Welcome to the Jungle is one that I usually play when I'm working out or running to try and like make it through the hill or whatever it is. So anything with that sort of underlying like amplification, from a musical standpoint, I think would work.
I love it. I love it. Love it. And my song is always the same song. It's Prince, Baby I'm a Star. So shout out again to the 80s. The music. Exactly. Exactly. All right. So you talked about growing up in a small town, but tell me about growing up and how do you think that shaped you?
So tremendously. So as I mentioned, my hometown now is a little over 2,000 people, but growing up was population 1,607.
Wow.
And it was one of those, just really cool childhoods where, it was sort of like you leave the house at whatever time in the morning, playing with all the neighbor kids, check in at lunch, go back outside, come back in when it's about dinner time, so your mom and dad won't get mad at you, things like that. And so, it was just a really lovely way to grow up. I lived across the street from one set of grandparents, all the neighbors, we all knew each other. And so there was just this keen sense that there were a lot of really watchful eyes, but in kind of like a supportive way, really looking out for me and my brother and really just, everyone else in the neighborhood. So, it was really this really, I think, just great little cocoon of, relationships, which I think first cemented, friendships and relationships being so important to me. But also my parents owned a business. So my parents owned a plastic injection molding company for 15 years. And so my dad started that. This is the intro to my new book. I talk more about their business. And my dad started it. He sort of like left his full-time job and this was his side hustle. And he made the decision to leave it, to pursue the business. When I was like 8, I was about 8 and my brother was 5. And so,
Wow.
it was a pretty bold move to make when you have 2 young kids
Yes.
and whatnot. So, but really seeing that courage take shape, really seeing how, how much hard work it took to really, start a business and what that looked like, but how much freedom and flexibility. And, he and my mom were always at my and my brother's sports games and events and school stuff and all of that. That autonomy and that freedom to sort of call your own shots was really, really demonstrated for me and cemented within me at a very, very young age. And so I've known for a long time that I was going to own a business of some sort. I just didn't know how it was all going to play out.
And I love that you drew that connection from there. That is a huge risk. Again, I'm an entrepreneur, so are you. And I think about, I always tell people it wasn't very risky for me because I have a husband who's got a job and he's got insurance and we're going to have food. But again, it's still a risk and it's still a lot of ups and downs. But to do that with 2 young kids at home in a small town, wow, you come from good stock.
And no, right. And I asked him, I'm like, what made you think you could do this? Like, were you scared? Like you've got 2 small kids, like what's going on? And he said, well, he's like, I was young and I just thought if this doesn't work out, I'll do something else. And I think sometimes it was such a practical answer.
Right. Okay.
Kind of like, duh, like I'll just do something else. And I don't think we oftentimes think about that when we're faced with, should I take the leap or should I make this big decision or should I pursue a path that might seem different or not what most people are doing, but it's where I feel called to go. And I think too, I never asked him this question, but I think he would answer that if he hadn't done it, he hadn't tried it. I think that's something he always would have regretted. And so that also stuck with me too, that response of like, oh, okay, well, it isn't really the end of the world if this doesn't work out. I really can go back and do something else or what have you, kind of gives you at least a little bit of extra, sort of cushion and courage, perhaps.
I love it. Okay, so that I love the connection between that as a lesson, even if it wasn't a lesson in here. I'm doing this because when you were young, but you saw that and it could have and it did shape what you did. So tell me about your career. How did take me from small town to today?
Sure. So I was always very interested and oriented toward healthcare facing professions. So I thought at first I was going to be a doctor or wanted to be a doctor. as I grew up, I realized how squeamish I was around blood and how much I don't even like people like wiggling their teeth in front of me. Like my daughter's got loose teeth and like that just freaks me out. And so I figured that might not be the best way for me to go. So I actually ended up deciding to go to do my undergrad in physical therapy, to study physical therapy, to potentially be a physical therapist, because I thought this was a healthcare type role, but I wasn't, exposed to all of the, typical doctor, nurse, PA stuff. And so I started down that road, and it was a super competitive program. And there were like 860 of us going for 24 slots. So most of us were not going to make it. And so I knew as I started to get into some of the more advanced like science classes and things like that, my interest in it started to wane a little bit, but I had to take a lot of psychology classes as part of the core curriculum. And I absolutely loved everything about the psychology classes, like what made humans tick, what was present when humans weren't functioning well, all of those things. And so very practically just decided when I wasn't going to continue on with physical therapy that I would just finish and pursue my undergrad in psychology. I thought very hard about going on for a PhD or an advanced degree in psychology, but I didn't really want to spend my time on the what was called abnormal psychology or the mental illness side of psychology at the time. Mm-hmm. And I loved my con law classes in undergrad. So I'm like, I'll go to law school. So that's really, that's literally the extent of the thought in terms of, why law school, right? And so I got into law school, and I remember really the first week, it was either the first week or the first couple of weeks, I was in the dean's office and I was sitting in front of him and I'm like, I don't know that this is right for me. I was getting very emotional about it. Like something about it just wasn't connecting. And he said, well, a lot of people say that. So I just figured like, okay, well, other people must be feeling this too. I'll just, kind of, stick it out or whatever. Sure. And so went through law school and practiced commercial real estate law for 7 years. And then, really during the last year of my law practice is when I started to burn out. But I didn't realize what it was or that there was this term called burnout. And really over the course of this last year, that total year, really experienced kind of the full range or spectrum of what we now know burnout to be. So really starting with like procrastinating, I don't want to, deal with this, 125-page lease negotiation thing that I have to do. So I'm going to, research recipes because I thought I was going to, go to pastry school and become a pastry chef. And so there was that. And then over the course of the year, I just couldn't get myself unstuck. And I started to notice that I was getting more frustrated with the people who I worked with. I was getting more frustrated with my clients, outwardly always very professional. But I really noticed myself really kind of separating from, just really wanting to be a lawyer and feeling like I was really attached in some way. And I think part of it is that I never really had that anchor. I never really had that like deep reason, like why I wanted to do this. And it made it easier for me to start to think about what could be next. And so I stopped my law practice. It was June of 2009. And I started it with my master's in applied positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania in September of 2009. And that came about because as I was trying to figure out how to get myself unstuck from the burnout, I actually ended up working with a coach, and she had just finished the Master in Applied Positive Psychology, the MAP program at UPenn. And I said, what is this program? Like positive psychology, that sounds so amazing. And that was my undergrad. And so she told me about it. And I basically just became obsessed with everything about the program and, of course, applied and got in. And I, again, didn't really go there seeking, like, I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to find. And it was only a year. And so I figured, all right, I'll have a master's after a year, but I know I feel like something's going to be here in this program that I can glom onto, that I can create a business around, that I can go help and teach other people so that they don't experience burnout, that we can somehow address some of these sources of stress in the world of work. And sure enough, it did. So that was what I didn't realize at the time there's a lot of these themes in my path, is that I didn't really realize what I was walking into. I just kind of said yes and then just sort of went for it and then stumbled along upon the thing that really resonated with me. But a lot of the professors at UPenn are some of the world's foremost scientists in the science of resilience, researchers in the science of resilience. So when we started to get into that segment of learning, I was just really, really drawn to it. Like, wow, like, if you stumble, if you have, failure, setback, obstacles, stressors, challenges, there's a healthier way to maneuver through that, to navigate through that. And so I just, again, became obsessed again with that science, and did my master's thesis in that. And as it turns out, when I graduated in 2010, the United States Army had just reached out to Marty Seligman and others at Penn to say, hey, you all have been kind of, you all have figured out how to teach and scale this resilience stuff within organizations. Could you potentially create a version of your Penn resilience program for Army drill sergeants and soldiers that we could use, that we could send our senior non-commissioned officers and officers through your program? You can certify them and they can go back to their units and start to teach the lower ranking soldiers some of the skills that really work in service of building resilience. And so I had a chance to apply to that program. They really managed our expectations and said, this program is just starting. We don't know if it's going to take off. You may never be called, but they wanted to train people up just in case. And so I think I waited like a month and they're like, hey, we've got an opening. Can you come to Philly and do this training? And I was like, sure. And it was just amazing. I mean, it was really the second part of my education, because I had the, sort of the research piece of the education, but I was a lawyer for 7 years. I didn't know how to teach this stuff to adults or to people or what have you. And so to be part of that and learning how to design teaching and things like that was just phenomenal. And I always say the soldiers helped put me back together. So it was more than just me teaching them. It was me learning from them. And it was me hearing them talk about their challenges and their struggles, because at the time I wasn't very open about my burnout experience and didn't talk about it a lot, and felt really kind of like, I don't know if embarrassed is the right word, but really was struggling trying to figure out how it happened in the first place. So hearing them talk about all their challenges started to make me kind of lower my walls a little bit and feel more comfortable, kind of going in a little bit more of that vulnerable direction. So
that's so interesting, because of course, when you think about, folks who are in the service, you don't think about their vulnerability and sharing. And so to have gotten that lesson, and as I was listening to you speak, you experienced burnout basically right after the downturn, right?
It was leading right into it. It was right as it was starting. And part of I think why it happened, when I unraveled, all of the reasons back, some of it was what I brought to the table, but a lot of it was, I mean, in the 2000s when I practiced, I mean, commercial real estate, like everyone, you could do whatever you wanted to from a real estate standpoint. Everyone got a loan. You could hardly have to do anything and you would get, whatever you needed to, buy and sell property. And so I was always busy. I was never not slow for 7 years. And so that was certainly a factor, certainly a factor as well. And, it's funny, you mentioned that about the drill sergeants, and we always did a segment on one of the days talking about their character strengths. So we'd have them take a specific strengths assessment. And one of the strengths of the 24 that we assessed is capacity to love and be loved. And like a ton of them, that would be one of their like top 5 or one of their signature strengths. And they hated it so much, because we'd have them, like post what their strengths were kind of, on flip charts around the wall. And they hated putting their names down for capacity to love and be loved, because they thought it was so like squishy and soft. But when you look at the definition and you look at what they do, I mean, they're tasked with, training up brand new soldiers and putting them into the Army system with Army values and what have you. And it is very much a teaching focused, they go at it, they go about it in some pretty intense ways, but the root of it for some of them, for a lot of them is that. So
I'm married to a former Marine, and when he talks about his experience at boot camp, he it's not like it's not hearts and flowers, but he also thinks back very fondly on the experience. And so it's like the definition of tough love to kind of get you into a space.
100%.
Yeah. I always say to him, I'm like, you are the one from our family to have sacrificed because I could never have done that. Again, that resilience piece, I don't have it there. I have in other places, but definitely not there. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad I asked you about that to bring us to where we are now. So is that then when you decided that you were going to launch the Stress and Resilience Institute?
So I actually started my business as I was going to, and right before I went to start at the MAP program at UPenn. So my
Okay.
business existed while I went to school and while I was doing the work with the soldiers,
Mhm.
but I didn't really have a clear, we were talking about branding. I didn't really have a clear idea of what the business was going to become or even what I wanted it to become. I mean, in my mind, I took a week off of work and went down and did, coach training and coach certification. And so I thought I was going to take whatever I learned at Penn and start coaching lawyers in some respect. I mean, that's
Mhm.
really where I thought it was going to go.
Mhm.
As I finished the year at Penn, I realized that there were so many more applications for what could be done. And so I wouldn't say, I put my business completely aside because, I spent about, what turned into, you might do one training a year with the Army turned into once a month every year for almost 4 years. And that was a pretty intense, obligation. And so when I wasn't doing that, I would, try and find speaking opportunities. I would try and write articles. And I remember in 2010, I wanted to write an article about lawyer well-being in Wisconsin Lawyer magazine. And I had to write 3 drafts of the article. And I remember, I think I even had to have like a call with like someone on the editorial board to explain like, why are we talking about well-being? And I mean,
Mhm.
it was not what it is today. And so I was trying to do those little things to try and just, start the conversation and have some sort of presence in this. But the business stuff really just was kind of on the side while the military stuff was happening.
Mhm. I mean, obviously, without knowing it, you've had great foresight because now this is like you can't turn around without people talking about wellness and well-being and the need to address how stress impacts our lives and how to navigate that. And so, again, you are obviously psychic, and this, so
Well, or you could say from an entrepreneurial perspective, I mistimed the market because yes,
Mhm.
there was some forward thinking there and I realized that that was a need, but
Yeah.
trying to get anything going in the legal profession at that time. I mean, there were a couple of people who happened to find me and I found them. And there were some initial things at like the PDC conference, maybe, or one or two, maybe firm conversations or like, we'll take a flyer and we'll bring her in and we'll see what happens. And certainly not enough to sustain a business. But in a
Mhm.
sense, that's also what pushed me into looking at other industries. So I've
Mhm.
always had across the industries work
Mhm.
versus just being in the legal profession because I had to.
Right.
I didn't have a choice. Otherwise, I wasn't going to have a business.
Good reason to do it. Obviously it applies everywhere. And I think ears are much more open now for many reasons, including obviously science and understanding that you're not your best self at work, which the business case is to figure this out, right? But also we've just survived the pandemic, and I cannot imagine that people are not thinking about the well-being of their workforce in many different ways. And if they are not, then I'm sure their workforce is going to slim down because people are not going to stay. And then thinking about the intersection of the work that you do and the fact that the workforce is changing and that people are much more open and they're also more demanding of spaces that will accommodate and understand and provide resources for who they are and what they're going through. So I hope that now the mind the street and the car have met. I think it's the road and the path, whatever the thing is, have met, so that the business is I'm sure very busy because, and if not, after this podcast goes viral, it will be. So
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think to your point, I think it's one of the things I think some leaders right now, like when I say right now, today, at the end of 2024, I think there are definitely quite a number of more leaders who get this and understand this than, certainly back in 2010. But I will tell you, I still think that a lot of leaders and a lot of people at work, I think they underestimate the impact and continue to underestimate the impact that the pandemic had in people's lives. And I think it was just such a sudden halting, literally impacted every single person on the planet kind of experience where, we saw life and death circumstances happening to people who we loved and people around the world. And because it lasted as long as it did, we really took a step back and said, is this what I want to do? Do I want to continue to do this, whatever this was? And you saw people in the moment, selling businesses and doing their thing and hopping in an RV and tooling around the country and all of that. But I think people, even if you didn't leave your job, I think people still really carry that with them to a much more heightened degree, such that they're now really scanning the workplace lens to look for things like, do I matter? Do you see me? Am I just a cog in the wheel? Do I have meaningful work? Do you care about me? And do I like the people who I work with? Do I feel like I belong, right? Are you drowning me in a mountain of work and I can't, go home and see my family now or have meaningful hobbies? And so I think the questions that we're asking about how we want to work have been reshaped. And I'm still not sure that leaders quite get how deep that runs.
Yeah, my therapist says, who everybody knows at my podcast audience knows, she saves lives every day. She says that we have not even started to pull apart the trauma that we have experienced. Like we're still in the wake of feeling the trauma as opposed to processing. And you know how on your phone it'll flash back and say like, oh, this picture happened.
Yeah.
Whenever it is a 20, I literally go into this space where I'm like, oh my God, that was the worst thing. Every time I'm wearing a mask. And so,
Yeah.
and that was, I did the pandemic in a house where we all had a space. And, think about folks who didn't and the loneliness. There's just so much that I, went into that. And the piece that you mentioned about folks reevaluating, my friends who are divorce attorneys, were like, everybody decided that this is not the thing for them anymore.
Yeah.
Because stress and resilience doesn't only happen just at the workplace. I mean, if you think about the stress that we have at home too, and how it leads to all of the things.
Yeah. And I mean, it crosses over. It'd be lovely if we could just like keep our work stress at work and then go home and deal with our families and then keep our family stress at home and then like come to work. And it just doesn't work that way. But the one thing it did is it allowed me to start to talk about, and I introduced the concept in my new book of post-traumatic growth. That really we did go through something that we can very aptly label as trauma or traumatic. And that I think a lot of people are familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder. But the other side of the coin is post-traumatic growth. So when you go through something that's traumatic or super challenging, most people make it through that event. And, when they look back on it, go, I wish that would not have happened. If I could do it all over again, I would not have wanted to go through that. Yeah. But I did. And they start to notice a renewed appreciation for life. The relationships become much more important, more spiritual growth. And there's some interesting things that come from it that, again, I think is a way for people in the workplace to understand we've sort of been rewired a little bit, from a human standpoint. So.
Wow. So speaking of that, obviously my podcast is on personal branding, and I think all of these things impact how you show up. And so when I think about burnout and stress and how it can show up in individuals and why it's important for us to acknowledge and figure out ways and strategies to navigate that, and why leaders especially need to prioritize this, it's because it doesn't just, you're not just hiding it on your own. It impacts everybody around you as well, too, because of how it comes out. And I think of one time that I had a lot going on. I had my son, my son is a cancer survivor, and he was in the hospital, and I was at a bar association meeting. I was doing way too much. And I was in this meeting and I like flipped out in this meeting. I was like, I had hit my point, and it's totally not me. My nickname is Pollyanna. I'm always right. This is the smile on my face. It is what it is. But I showed up and I didn't even realize it was happening until somebody afterwards was like, "What's going on?" And so when you think about how if you don't manage the stress and the work and all the other things you have, how it can show up and impact your brand. Tell me, like, what are the things you talk to people about and when you're coaching them around navigating this and the
Sure.
resilience of it?
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about, especially if we're talking through the lens of stress and burnout, to look at it on two fronts. And this is another place where I think certainly that I've learned a ton over the years doing this work is that, particularly with the resilience work, I very much started with, okay, how do I help individuals foster and build their own sense of resilience, their capacity? How do I help them increase their capacity to navigate challenge, uncertainty, failure, setback, what have you, and then not just bounce back, but actually grow from it. Mm-hmm. And so I approached it through that lens. And I think it's really important for us to kind of use that as a starting point, because what really helped me start to unravel my understanding of why I burned out was when I started to have sort of those deeper conversations with myself about how I'm wired. I am very much a people pleaser. I'm very much a recovering perfectionist now. I'm what I call an achieveaholic, right? I'm all about like goals and like let's build the thing, let's scale the thing, let's do the thing, and all of those things have served me very well, but they have also really served to undercut my ability to take intentional pauses. Like the things that I hear myself saying are harder for me to do because of that wiring, but I now know that, and so I can really start to manage around that. And so I don't think people realize with burnout how deep we have to kind of be thinking about those core values and beliefs about the way we think the world should operate and some of those deeper conversations. But the other piece of the puzzle, which is actually the more significant piece, that we often don't talk about, and I certainly didn't even stumble across it all until well into my studies and after when I started to interview more people about their burnout experiences, is the role that the workplace environment plays, that the system plays, that the culture plays, that your leader plays, and how strongly that can impact whether or not people experience good stuff from work, whether they're engaged at work, whether they're motivated at work, or whether they experience some of these other pieces. And so when I'm talking to people about this, we'll talk on both of those levels, right? We do a lot of like really deep introspection around that wiring piece. And then I'll be like, all right, let's talk about the workplace. Like, what are you doing or not doing in the work environment? How is the work environment kind of conspiring to be part of this problem or part of this process? So they can understand that there's a lot that they have control over, but there are other things, other forces that are impacting and leading to burnout that they have to acknowledge and understand, but may not necessarily have the complete, control or influence to deal with. But it also then takes a little bit of weight off their shoulders because it's not just them, right? They know that it's not just, if I could give you 5,000 stress management techniques or what have you, and it's still, if you, are working in a system or an environment that just isn't working for you and that is a mismatch, it's going to be really hard. So,
And self-assessment is a part of I think every growth spurt that we have, right? You got to figure it out, and then, but asking those questions about the environment is such a huge piece. In the work that I do for inclusion, it's what is here, to your point, is that supports everybody belonging, and what doesn't support it, and without even knowing the organization, I can tell like it's probably the same things that impact burnout culture, which is, we meet too much and I don't have time to do my work. You evaluate me unfairly. You're passive aggressive. You don't communicate. Like, there's all kinds of things like without knowing that people experience. And there's this like replication of it too, because when people don't stop and think about how they are leading and how they are modeling, then it just continues to happen because folks think that's what success is, right? Like in order to get there, this is you're doing work that needs to be done because
Well, we don't, but in fairness, particularly in the legal profession, we're not taught any of this, right? We don't have like leadership 101 training a lot, like certainly not in law school, certainly not in the earlier parts of your career.
Mhm.
And then I mean, run into so many lawyers who don't even see themselves. Like if they could be a mid-level associate or a senior associate, and they don't even see themselves as a leader, even though they're handing out work assignments and they are interacting with people at different levels. And, it's really a set of behaviors and not a title, but we don't see it that way. And that's one of the things that I think the working with the military helped me understand in a keen way is that they're all about like leadership and leadership training. And how do we build this into like everyday stuff and formal programs? And we started on day one, and here's what's expected, and here's our values, and this is what you have to do. And it's just treated in such a different way and it's not just the legal profession. I think it's just generally our world of work. If there is leadership something, it's not necessarily through this lens that we talk about it.
Right. Like people think of leadership as a sort of aspirational, like Martin Luther King, as opposed to
Yeah.
everyday folks who are doing the action of leading, whether or not they consider themselves leaders. Speaking of branding, or hate, and so that if then you're only thinking about what happens to you, then you're causing trauma without maybe even intending or knowing that you are doing so. Oh, this is fascinating. All right, so let's talk about the book.
Yes.
So the new book is talking about leadership, right? And why you should be leading well, right?
Yes.
So tell me about the mindsets that you think leaders should be encompassing in order to lead well, lead better.
Yes. So this really came from, I would say, certainly all of my work up to this point, but really concentrated over the last 5-ish or so years, particularly during the pandemic, when I would go in and I would sit with a team. We would, workshop, train. I would talk to leaders, hear very specifically, like, here's where my team is struggling, or here's where I'm struggling, or here's the issues we're facing, or here's what I'm not doing well. And the same kind of common themes kept coming up. And I realized that this could be sort of like a framework actually for leaders generally moving forward. And so a lot of this, certainly has the research underpinning support to it, but was, largely born out of all of the conversations that I had and the interactions that I had during this period of time. So the first one, and I would say the first mindset, is where I usually will advocate leaders start, in part because it's easy. And I put that in air quotes because, if you're not doing a practice, it takes time, and it, is not necessarily easy work to do, but it's what I call sticky recognition and mattering. So prioritizing sticky recognition and mattering. And so really letting people know, giving them the evidence of their impact when they do something well, and being able to speak in those words, whether it is just simply saying, thank you so much for summarizing the depositions the way you summarize them, help me see the key takeaway points quickly so that I could have a better conversation with our client. That little plus piece becomes super, super sticky and fortifying for people. And then that leads to this sense of, not only am I achieving something, but you're also recognizing me for it, which are the two big components of mattering. And that, I would say, of all the things that I researched in this book, has really had the biggest impact on me. It has really reshaped how I see and how I interact with my friends, how I interact with Lucy, my daughter, how I talk about a lot of this work, because really what it comes down to is that I want to feel important, I want to feel noticed, and I want to feel needed. And so how are we conveying that to people on a day-to-day basis? And it lives in when I interviewed one of the leading researchers on mattering, and he said mattering lives in the little in-between moments of your day-to-day. It lives in the, how do you, talk to somebody in the 10 minutes you're walking down the hall? When we patch in for a Zoom call or conversation, are you asking me about my family? Or are you asking me about, like, what's on my plate today, or what have you? It's just like noticing people. So we kind of have to unwind all the way back to, the foundation of just like being good humans, essentially. So that's a big one.
Yeah.
The next one is what I call ABC needs. So focusing on ABC needs. So autonomy, belonging, and challenge, as I call it. So it's literally those three components of self-determination theory, essentially. So humans want to have a little bit of kind of controlling our own adventure a little bit. We want to feel like we're belonging, that we're part of teams that care about us and care for us.
Yes.
And we want to do good work. We want to feel challenged at work. We want to, be continuously working on new things and expanding our horizons. So that's the second one. Workload sustainability. I was almost not going to write this chapter because it is, boy, I got into it, and it's a complicated in and of itself, could be like its own like 5-part book.
Wow.
But it was the biggest issue that I consistently heard leaders say, my team is burned out or stressed out, or I'm burned out or stressed out because I have an unmanageable workload. Like I just cannot deal with the sheer quantity and volume of everything that I have to do. And kind of to the point that you were saying, right? Like I don't have time to do my actual work because I've got like 18 million things that I'm trying to do. And so I really wanted to dig into that and try to tease that apart a little bit. And really what it came down to is having better teaming practices, having the right teaming practices, and having the right types of recovery and building in that time for recharge. So that was that one. The next one is systemic stress resilience. So another huge theme that I heard very consistently was we have no idea how to navigate the uncertainty, the change, the challenge in like within our team, within our organization. We just went through a merger. We're worried our company is going to be sold. We have new technology coming at us all the time, and we just don't have the capacity to be able to take it on. And so I talk about it in the book from a little bit more of a teams lens. So teams and resilience, and then the organization itself. How can it develop resilience? So there's that piece. And then the last one is just meaning and values alignment. So if we are going to go from what I call generational conflict to generational curiosity, if we're going to lead in a way that promotes meaningful work, because we're hearing so much from the younger generations that is an absolutely critical and crucial thing that I need to have to be engaged in my world of work, is to know that impact and that sense of meaning. There's a great new study framing 6 different kind of areas or capacities that leaders can develop that lead to a sense of meaningful work. And so it's not that leaders have to do all of these things or go through all of these mindsets, but I'm guessing that there's probably 1 or 2 where they realize like, ooh, this is a significant area of concern for us. Let's hop in here and start to, go through some of the practices that can start to help. So really big picture at the end of the day. What I realized in going through this process is that what it comes down to leading well is a little bit of better teaming practices and a little bit better human practices. So it's that combination of some teaming stuff and some human stuff.
Yes.
That I think is really going to carry us into what the future of work is becoming and looks like.
I love the framework. Is that the study, who the study you just mentioned, who did that study?
The study about meaningful work?
The one with the six pieces. Yeah.
Yes. So the six leadership practices that lead to meaningful work was actually done. 3 of the 4 researchers are colleagues of mine from the positive psychology program. And then the 4th person is the researcher who I interviewed, who is one of the experts on workplace mattering. And so the 4 of them got together. It's really, really a lovely study. And it's, there've been, certainly other studies about, meaningful work and what have you. It was just so great that they were able to zero in on the specific practices that really matter and help.
I mean, it's the 5 mindsets it's so comprehensive, right? And then thinking of that first one though, that's relationship advice that can be used in so many, again. Yes. And I think about this from the brand perspective, is that when you make people feel loved, and that's really what this is, they love you back, right? Yeah. Right? When they feel seen, they see you back and they stay. And I love that the post the colon is the talking about retention, because listen, if nothing else, then much of the work that I do when I go in places and talk about branding and talk about professional development, just generally, this is happening so that you want to stay, so that you're being invested in. And if you're not investing and people don't feel that, but my friends laugh at me because I use magic and love a lot in my talk, but it's exactly that. And then they will trust you more too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because they feel as if the work they're doing is not just going, to be a cog in the wheel, but you're actually being seen. And so I love that you won. I love that.
It's huge. And mattering intersects with belonging. Mattering intersects with resilience.
Mm-hmm.
So when I feel like I matter to an organization or to my family or to my community, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I encounter challenging or difficult things, when I stumble, when there's an obstacle, I'm more likely to be able to push through it if that's what makes sense, or to make the right decision about plan B, or maybe I've got to stop something altogether when I know that I come from that place. And I actually, I just recently did a survey study with ALM where we asked lawyers and legal professionals to rate the frequency of a number of different statements related to the three different dimensions of burnout. And one of the statements that I actually really wanted to put in there, I have a few things in there about appreciation at work and mattering and things. I don't call it mattering, but I put one of the statements was, I feel like a cog in the wheel at work. And then the frequencies were things like never, once a month, a few times a year, like a couple times a week, or every day. And I believe it was 44.1% said at least once a week, multiple times a week, or every day. Wow. I feel like a cog in the wheel. And it was 23.1% who said every day. I feel like a cog in the wheel. And then we wonder, why are people disengaged? Why are people leaving? Why can't we retain people? Why are people so checked out and frustrated? And it's sort of like, it's not the entire answer, but I mean, it's a pretty big part of it.
Yeah, yes, a huge part of it. Because if you don't find value or you don't feel as if the work you are doing is valued, that's just, yeah. I know that all of you are, as you're listening to this, you're probably thinking about all the traumatic work that you have been in or are in currently. And my hope is that thinking about this, because there's a lot of leaders who listen to the podcast, that number one, they get the book and really think about these pieces and how they can be the catalyst. Right? I'm a big believer in, you read a book and you have to spread the word. You have to be like, you don't just read it for yourself for your own edification. You have to spread what you have learned. For those of us who are burnt out, speaking of reading since law school, I'm like, tell me everything that you read and what you learned.
Right.
I have to read it for yourself. But that being said, I was glad to hear that you were doing this on audiobook and tell, because everybody knows I have to listen to it on audiobook for my ADHD, but also just in general. Me and books since law school, I can't. It's just too much. So there's that. Judge me if you want. It's fine. I don't care.
No, and that's fascinating because I cannot consume audio, I cannot consume books that way. Like it just goes, and then I start thinking of something else, and it just doesn't keep me focused like actually having a book in front of me does. And so I was so thankful that I got to read the audio version for this book, because I didn't get to do it for my first book. And so it was a very unique and fun process to go in and read that. So if you ever do get the audio version, it will be my voice that you will.
It's just so much better. So I'm an audiobook gal. It's so much better when the author reads it, because you can hear the passion, you can hear the conviction, and you can hear where, and I just like it better as somebody who listens to audiobooks, except for the folks who have voices where I'm like, okay, maybe, but most of the time, it's fine. Okay, so I knew this was going to go by quickly. I was conversation, so I'm trying to think. So I'm going to ask you my three final questions, but I'm going to do a sub question on this next one. So what do you do for fun?
Oh yeah. So this is an interesting question, because this past year was like 90, it's so funny because, as somebody who talks about burnout, I was literally coming up around October, November, and I'm like, am I burned out? Because it was like, I wrote the book the entire year. I was still traveling my same amount. I am one of those folks who got divorced during the pandemic. And so, solo parent Lucy. And so I was sort of like, wow, that was a lot. But one of the things that Lucy and I particularly love to do, that I personally have always loved to do, is sports and athletics. And so she and I share a short sort of little season ticket package with our neighbors to the Milwaukee Brewers baseball games. And
Nice.
so we will go to probably a half a dozen games or so during the summer, but it is just one of our most fun things that we do. And I, again, personally, but her and I together, we absolutely love to travel. And so anytime we're trying to figure out like hotels with good pools, if anybody has suggestions, all of that good stuff. So those would be the two big things.
I love it. And as a fellow baseball fan, I love going to a game. I was raised a Yankees fan. And this year I was forced to go to a Mets game. And I actually loved it because they have a really great stadium. So there's that. So you kind of started answering the question I was going to ask you, but I'll ask you directly. So what is Paula Davis's resilience strategy?
Yes. So there's a few things. So for me, kind of back to that athletic athlete sort of piece of the puzzle. I used to play team sports, well after college and, for quite some time, but got away from it quite a number of years ago. But I love to run. I love to work out and to exercise. Like I run anxious. And so running or like kickboxing or things like that really help to drain some of that reserve sort of mental just chatter and things that I experience on a fair amount. And so that's a huge piece of the puzzle. The other big piece is my friendships. I think of my friendships as my chosen family. And, one of the things I'm most proud of is that I have friends that go back 35 years ish or so. I've got my friends back from, starting high school and grade school and things like that, all through, current. And so I've gotten better, certainly in the last probably 6 to 7 years or so, about really, really making sure we stay connected and that we talk on a regular basis and that I reach out to them on a regular basis and draw so much support from them. So very much that sort of relationshipy kind of piece of the puzzle. So, and volunteering, I would say would be the third prong.
Oh, that's
both separately and of course with Lucy. So we have our fun that way too.
and that's a great addition to it too, because obviously, I think one way that we can sort of offset some of our own stress is to really be of service to others and think about others' experiences to get a little clarity, even if you don't take it away. Clarity. I always say, when I hurt, I give. I hurt, I give. I hurt, I give.
Same.
Yeah, yeah.
Same. It's like where I first feel like I need to orient, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like I need to give back. I need to be just out with others doing that. Yeah.
Okay, well, great. Now that I've gotten all the tea about what you do, and everybody knows that my resilience strategy is a massage as many times
Oh,
as much as I can. So my masseuse knows me better than most of my family members. Anyway, so I ask folks on the podcast two things, and one is, what is the authentic aspect about your own personal brand that you will never compromise on?
I don't know if this sort of answers the question or not, but it was just kind of where I kept coming back to that. I always want people, whether I'm in, like talking to a lot of people via a Zoom or like I'm in person and we're going through a training or what have you, or certainly, one-on-one with coaching. I just want people to feel like they're talking to a friend, right? That somebody who's like not just researched a bunch of stuff, but like is trying to meet them where they're at and talk to them where they're at, wherever their life is at. And also from a place of like, I've messed a lot of this stuff up too. Like, not only have I burned out, like I got divorced, the whole, I mean, like I've been there, done that with a lot of, mistakes and hurdles and things like that. And so, just wanting people to know that I am there to help. I might be there to teach something or impart a lesson or what have you, but that I'm really trying to do it from a place of I'm in this with you, versus I'm just trying to teach you something and then I'm going to leave. So
Right. That relatability is a really important
yes.
piece of that. And that's what I heard from you. So, branding room only is a play on the term standing room only, because I am clever. So, so
That's
my
amazing.
question for you is, Paula Davis, what is that thing about you, that magic about you that would have a room filled to the gills with standing room only to experience about you?
Again, I think it kind of goes back to what I just said, right? I think it's that blend of kindness with she knows a bunch of stuff about some cool things. And I always pride myself in what I actually honestly see myself as is somebody who can take complex ideas that you might find in, a 45-page research paper. And what is the essential one or two nuggets that you need to know and break it down in a way that you can feel like you can practice it. So I think it's that combination of things. It's a little bit of the sciencey stuff with a little bit of the human-centered stuff, essentially, that makes for a unique me.
Well, I will say, because there's a special rule that if your name is Paula and you want to be on my podcast, you have to be very special.
Oh,
So you can't just be named Paula because, again, it's my brand. But I will say that what you just said is exactly right. When I saw Paula speak at a conference, I was blown away, and usually I am not. I'm like, this is what I do for a living. But I was blown away so much so that I sent you a note to say that how much I really appreciated you and the way that you presented and how relatable the content was and how much I learned during it. So I will say that you put your money where your mouth is in terms of what you just said. It is absolutely true, and I appreciate you taking the complex to make it accessible, digestible, and most importantly, actionable.
yeah.
So tell everybody how they can find out about you and your work, please.
Yes. So the kind of the central place to go for all things about me and my work would be my website, which is stressandresilience.com. So there's lots of resources there. It's a place where you will find more information about all my trainings, books, and what have you. From a social media standpoint, I am on Instagram and X, but I really, really just prefer LinkedIn. So it's usually where I will post all my new articles and research and things of that nature. So Paula Davis on LinkedIn is where you can find me as well.
Fabulous. So we'll put all those things in the show notes. And everybody tell that friend, the one that's stressed or the leader who's causing the stress, that they need to get all of these books and they need to listen to this podcast. And don't forget to like and download. And everybody, remember to stand by your brand and do it hopefully less stressfully and without burnout. Thanks for joining me, Paula.
Thank you so much, Paula.